Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of James Madison, and the focus is father of... we'll fill in that blank. The year is 1788, and Madison has just finished up a time in New York working with Alexander Hamilton on the Federalist Papers, a series of essays trying to convince the state delegations that are forming across the country to approve, to ratify the new Constitution. Madison has his own work cut out for him because Virginia is going to be one of the closest states in deciding yes or no. And about 170 delegates were showing up in Richmond, Virginia, and in fact, Madison had to hurry there to get there in time after he had been elected as a representative from his home area of Orange County. Well, there was strong opposition in Virginia to the Constitution, and with some pretty powerful people, including Patrick Henry of the old "give me liberty or give me death." He felt that there was too much concentration of power in this new Constitution, too much power for the central government that was going to put liberty at risk, both for the states and the individuals. He was decidedly against this new Constitution. Also in his camp, you had George Mason, who had been an outspoken member of the Constitutional Convention, but in the end decided not to sign it. He couldn't put his name on it for a variety of reasons, including the fact that there was no Bill of Rights, a separate set of activities guaranteeing rights for the individuals across the country that the majority could never impose or take away from the minority. So you had Henry and you had George Mason against the Constitution. In favor, you had Governor Edmund Randolph. Now, Randolph, interestingly enough, also did not sign the Constitution as a member of the Constitutional Convention. He wasn't for it there, but he is for it now, and he's for it mainly because there's no alternative. He believes that if this Constitution isn't ratified, this country is going to fall apart, so Randolph is now on board, and of course, alongside him is James Madison. Madison had the answer for most of the criticisms that Henry and Mason were peppering at the convention delegates one after another. Except when Madison was out sick. He missed several days. Of course, Madison's sickly his entire life, and so he missed a number of sessions, but when he was there, he was the most responsive on the pro side and in deflecting against the criticisms, even though he was really hard to hear because he wasn't feeling well, he wasn't projecting much, and so it was noteworthy that people really had to pay attention to get Madison's point, but when they did, he seemed to be convincing to a number of delegates. There was one other secret hand pushing the Constitution in its favor of ratification in Virginia, and that was George Washington, who was not at the Virginia Convention, the ratifying convention, but had been at the Constitutional Convention where he served as the convention's president. Washington was very much in favor of the new document and the new set of rules, and he had been writing letters, a variety of correspondence to colleagues and delegates urging them to support this new construct. When they came down to a vote, the first thing that Patrick Henry did was he put up a proposal that Virginia's assurance, or ratification rather, of the Constitution would be contingent. He was insisting on a second national convention to hear amendments. And James Madison was absolutely against this. In his words, previous amendments are but another name for rejection. This was not on the table. You were either going to approve the Constitution as is, or you would reject it. And the Virginia delegates sided with Madison in a vote, close vote, of 88 to 80. They then took the vote on ratification itself, and only one person changed their vote. The final vote in favor of ratification, 89 to 79, Virginia could have been the state to put them over the top, but they just missed out. New Hampshire actually became the 9th state to ratify just a few days before this vote was taken in Richmond. Virginia comes on next as number 10. New York, in another really close vote, also passes and ratifies the Constitution shortly thereafter. You've now got 11 of the 13 states, more than required per the Constitution, where they needed at least 9. And importantly, you've got the two largest states, New York and Virginia, are now on board. The Constitution can now go into effect. Of course, it's worth remembering that this was essentially illegal. The Articles of Confederation had a very firm requirement. In fact, it was one of the challenges of operating under the Articles. All 13 states needed to ratify amendments. Now, of course, this wasn't really amending the Articles. They completely rewrote the thing. But in essence, they were replacing it, and you would think they would follow the law of the land, the Articles of Confederation, to get that unanimous decision. They did not. North Carolina, Rhode Island wouldn't come on board until actually well after the new government was up and running in Rhode Island's case, but nobody seemed to care. There was agreement. This was the new law of the land. The Constitution went into effect. Now, a legitimate question is, well, who is most responsible for this outcome? And it was in 1827, some 40 years later, that a former congressman by the name of Charles Ingersoll offered a toast for Madison. And he said, "I offer for your acceptance, gentlemen, as a sentiment becoming this meeting, the health and happiness of James Madison, the father and guardian of the Constitution." The father and guardian of the Constitution. And it's a name that stuck. The father of the Constitution is sort of the moniker that goes with James Madison. Madison rejected the term. He responded by saying, "You give me credit to which I have no claim." This was not like the fabled goddess of wisdom, the offspring of a single brain. It ought to be regarded as the work of many heads and many hands. And in this case, Madison is exactly right. There was no father of the Constitution, including him. It was a group effort. Madison was clearly a major catalyst for getting the Constitution in place, starting up with the convention, getting George Washington to attend so the other states would show up. In the ratification process, both with the Federalist essays and his work at the Virginia Ratifying Convention, Madison was a major catalyst. But so was Alexander Hamilton. So was George Washington. And at the convention itself, while Madison was a constant participant, there were others: James Wilson, Roger Sherman, George Mason, Gouverneur Morris, who actually had the pen and wrote out the final version. All of these had major roles in advancing the cause of getting this new Constitution in place. Plus, we have to remember, at the Constitutional Convention, a majority of Madison's proposals were rejected by the audience, by the delegates. And it's pretty hard to be the father of something when more than half of your proposals are ultimately rejected. So Madison, clearly a major role, but father of the Constitution really doesn't fit. So now it's time to govern. The Constitution is in place and Madison is looking for a role. What role would that be? Well, again, Patrick Henry was pretty much against Madison now on almost every level, and he pretty much blocked Madison's potential ascendancy into the United States Senate. And he also made it pretty hard for Madison even to win a seat in the House of Representatives, because he put in his jurisdiction James Monroe, another very popular member of the elite in Virginia. And you had Madison and Monroe, the only time in the nation's history where two future presidents actually went town to town competing for each other for a seat in the House of Representatives. And that's exactly what they did. They were campaigning and giving speeches in a number of towns before the final vote came in. And one of the reasons it's believed that Madison won is he started to give way on a key topic, the Bill of Rights. Madison had been adamant against the Bill of Rights in terms of the ratifying convention in Virginia. But he made an interesting statement leading into his time in Congress. "I will own that I never considered this provision for a Bill of Rights so essential to the federal Constitution as to make it improper to ratify it until such an amendment was added. I always conceived that in a certain form such a provision was neither improper nor altogether useless." Well, he may have conceived that, but he certainly never said it. In fact, he had mostly said the opposite at the Constitutional Convention. He thought it was unnecessary. He thought it was even dangerous, and he gave his reasons why we should not articulate this thing called a Bill of Rights, which a number of states had put in place. But now, as he's going into Congress, he wins his election, he's not only going to embrace the idea, he's going to move forward and actually champion it. Madison decides that he's going to pick up the pen and write out what would turn out to be the Bill of Rights. In fact, he got his studious political scientist hat on. He looked at more than 200 proposals for amendments that had come up at the various state ratifying conventions, including 4 from his home state of Virginia. Now, he stayed away from diluting any of the core powers in the Constitution. That was not his focus. He was really focused on protections for individual liberty, that he wanted to make sure that a majority could not simply take away from a minority. And he produced 19 amendments. 12 of them were approved by Congress, and 11 eventually made it into the Constitution. Now, we know 10 got ratified actually within about a year, and they became what we call the Bill of Rights. Trial by jury, warrant for searches, no self-incrimination, right to bear arms, freedom of speech, press, religion, and on for the 10 amendments that made it into the Constitution as the Bill of Rights. there was an 11th made it in. It just took 203 years to get there. That's right, the 27th Amendment, currently the last one in place, was also introduced by Madison. It was stating that Congress couldn't raise their own salaries during the current term. Well, that was not passed in the late 1790s, or in the 1790s. It was passed again over 200 years later, but Madison gets credit for 11 of the 27 amendments in the Constitution, which would be a really big surprise to the Founding Fathers to know that after Madison's first 10 went in, only 17 more amendments would be approved in the next 230 years. Given all the angst about the Constitution at the beginning, that would be a big surprise. Nevertheless, the Bill of Rights is approved, and we can look at the impact it had. First of all, it didn't have much of an impact for about 100 years. In part because the Supreme Court interpreted these new amendments, the Bill of Rights, as only being actionable against the federal government, not state governments or individual actions where some of these majority taken advantage of rights of minorities continued to take place for over a century. It was really in the early 20th century that the court started to turn, looking at the Due Process Clause in the 14th Amendment, starting to apply these other rights-based amendments to all of the citizenry, not just based on federal laws, but also state laws and private actions. Some of the most significant Supreme Court cases in terms of individual liberty and freedoms in the 20th century and beyond tie back to James Madison's original 10 amendments that passed that we call the Bill of Rights. So as we look at Madison's contributions, clearly he was a major catalyst for the Constitution, but he was not the father of that document. But if you want to make him the father of something, he does deserve this one, the father of the Bill of Rights. And that's James Madison and the father of From the Life of James Madison. For more Presidential Chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.